Gun shop employees, what are some red flags that have caused you to deny a sale of a firearm? Story 1. I worked in retail, selling firearms in California for 4 years. The paperwork for gun sales in this state will give you carpal tunnel. I had a great customer who would come in with his wife and son to talk about guns and such, and pick up range gear. After about a year of knowing the guy, he came in looking a bit shaken up, shopping for a new shotgun with his wife. Turns out there was an intruder in his home while they were sleeping, a 19-year-old man, and he shot the intruder. He said the police didn't even arrest him because it was clearly self-defense. I sold him a shotgun outfitted to be comfortable for either him or his wife in the event they have a repeat of bad luck. I called it a peace of mind sale. Over the next 18 months, the guy changed drastically. First, he started retelling how he shot an intruder to anyone and everyone. Then he stopped bringing his family in with him. Then he started coming in for ammo and going to the range more frequently until it became a daily thing. Then he started going hunting for coyotes and talking about the field dressing in more detail than some of our customers were comfortable with. He lost all his excess weight, and there wasn't much there before. His wife left him and wouldn't let him see his son anymore. He said she was insisting he see a therapist. He seemed to be hunting every day at this point, and I pointed out he might be trying to normalize the act of him in an attempt to cope with having offed that boy. He got quiet and nodded to himself, but then left kind of quickly. He came in a couple of weeks later and wanted to buy some 12-gauge rounds, similar to the Broadhead Hexalit 32. They're a slug with twisted blades that break off upon impact and crisscross through the target, bouncing around and making a real mess of things. I asked how he and his family were. He said that he wouldn't know. I pointed out that the only shotgun he had was at his wife's house. He just stared at me, and I took in the sight of this guy. He used to look like a Ken doll businessman, but at that point he looked wild in the eyes, like he had gone rabid. I told him I wasn't going to sell him anything gun-related for a while. I told him I think his wife was right, and he needs some professional guidance, and I said if he wants to buy anything at our store, he'll have to get that guidance, or take up fishing. His eyes welled up with tears, and he left. I'm not sure if he was going to do what I was suspecting, and I never got the chance to find out how everything turned out for him because he never came back. Looking back, I wish I had handled it a bit more diplomatically and that I had the know-how to help him work through his emotions. We may have been the only people he was actually talking to about this, and it sucks that I didn't find a way to make better use of that and help him through what he was clearly going through. Before we continue, do us a quick favor. Smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. A sketchy bloke came in and wanted to look at lever-action shotguns. Before this thing even left my hands, he was smashing the lever as hard and fast as he could. I asked him not to do that, and had to explain to a grown man why it's not okay to roughly handle anything brand new that you haven't bought. He's got one of those 5-year-old kids who keeps interrupting us talking because he wants to hold the gun. I turned my back to double-check the price, and when I turned around, I was looking down the barrel of the shotgun the father had handed to his kid, and I heard the click of him dry firing it at me. I ripped it out of this kid's hand and told the dad to get the heck out, and the dad started abusing me because I hurt his kid's hand when I pulled the shotgun away. Having his kid dry fire a shotgun in my face isn't that big of a deal, apparently. Story 3. I used to work in a large outdoor retailer. I had a man come in for a gun who refused to give me his ID. Also, he didn't want to give me his name, address, date of birth, or any other info. He said he should just be able to answer the questions on the background check, and that should be all I needed. Sale denied. Story 4. I worked for the Mart for a number of years, selling guns. The most blatant red flag to me was just someone wanting a gun but not knowing the brand, model, or caliber that they wanted. In my 7 years selling, all while Nix was running, I only ever had 2 denied background checks. One was a guy who had threatened his parents and had been arrested a few days before. He had just been released from jail and came straight to us. He came off as a normal guy, not a single red flag. The other was a guy who was excited he finally got to participate in deer gun season because his restraining order against his ex-wife had finally expired. I knew his ex-wife. They had settled their differences long ago and were on good terms. Or so he thought. He was 2 days from the expiration date, actually, and the cops had to get involved in that. I truly felt bad for that guy. Story 5. So, there's a thing called a straw purchase. It's when individual A can't legally purchase a firearm, and so they get individual B to purchase it for them. I had several occurrences when a couple of people would come on together. One would lead the questions and then disappear as soon as the paperwork came out. That's a dead giveaway. Also, I once had a guy come in asking for a chopper. I had no idea what he meant until he said he was looking for an AK. The first thing he asked was, "Can I finish someone off with this?" I took it back, locked it up, told him that those were the magic words that mean you lose the chance to handle guns, and walked off. He tried to defend himself by saying, "I meant a pig." Story 6. I am an owner and operator of an internet sales-oriented firearms business, but I do sales and persons do FBCs for other FFLs in the area. I don't have any guidelines as to what I look for, aside from the federally mandated rules. I do, however, have gut feelings that will push me to deny a sale. If a customer comes in with bruises on their hands, I will deny a sale regardless of whether they pass an FBC. Bruises like this are generally caused by physical violence, which is something I look for. Another sign is if they come in distraught, acting weary or nervous. Again, even if they pass the FBC, I will deny a sale to them in most cases. The same goes for any physical or emotional signs of mental impairment. I had a man come in around 6 months ago looking to buy one of my rifles. He passed the FBC with no issues. I had a gut feeling that I should deny the sale and did so. 3 days later, he was charged with domestic assault for beating his girlfriend to a pulp. I might have saved her life by denying the sale. There are other typical things, such as outward signs of drug or alcoholism. As an FFL, I have the right to deny service to anyone for any reason, and I try to be as fair as humanly possible. Will there be some that fall through the crack? Yes. Will I feel responsible? Probably. Am I at fault if they pass the federal background check and then commit a crime with my firearm? No. Story 7. I worked at a Field and Stream store in my late teens, and while most of our reasons for denying sales were pretty by the book, they were still worth taking seriously. We enforced some strict store rules, like holding on to a customer's ID if they wanted to handle any firearm behind the counter, and treated them almost like the law. Straw purchases were by far the most common issue. You could usually tell when someone was buying for someone else, especially if they were glued to their phone or constantly running to the parking lot. If someone came back a few days later asking for the exact same gun their friend had been eyeing and couldn't explain why they wanted it, that was a denied sale and usually got them blacklisted from all Field and Stream locations. Sometimes we'd even file a police report. Then there were the people who walked in and immediately asked for the cheapest gun we had without caring about brand or caliber, a major red flag. If they refused to show ID, we'd ask them to leave. If they gave one, it often got reported. Another big one was filling out paperwork incorrectly. Honest mistakes like confusing county and country were forgivable, but if someone misspelled their own name or gave the wrong birth date, we'd deny the sale and blacklist them. I still remember my friend catching a guy who checked yes for being a convicted felon. He was arrested before he even left the store. We also had to deal with people who were intoxicated or showed signs of drug use, like track marks or facial sores. Some customers were just generally sketchy, asking weird questions about how lethal a gun was or making creepy jokes about execution. Even if someone just pointed a gun in an unsafe direction, that was enough to get them kicked out. And if they seemed angry or aggressive, we'd handle it carefully, but they were usually asked to leave too. Honestly, it was a good job overall. I met some great people and learned a ton, but yeah, you definitely develop a sixth sense for when something just isn't right. Story 8. I'm an FFL dealer that does mostly dealer-to-dealer transfers all over the country. Every now and then, I get a phone call from a denied transferee who wants my company to intervene. We stay polite and firm and defer to the receiving FFL. In reality, I wouldn't intervene with an FFL dealer's decision any more than I would intervene with NS, the National Instant Check System. I once received a call from a gentleman who explained to me that he was having trouble picking up a handgun for his son. Understood. Handgun transfers have a few more rules than long gun, shotgun, and rifle transfers, and very rarely the transferring dealer is misinformed on the rules or state regulations. If this is the case, I'll ask the dealer to at least consider the transfer, but it's a soft sell and not one that I'm going to press. So, I'm talking to this guy, and he's telling me that his son went in to pick up a handgun, and the dealer said he couldn't transfer it to him. He never mentioned a 4437, and I presumed that the son was between 18 and 20, an age range where it is legal to outright own a long gun, but illegal to outright own a handgun. However, it is legal for a parent to have possession of the gun and give it to their kid. The kid just can't travel solo with the handgun in his possession. In a situation like this, it's quite understandable if the kid got turned away, and some very few dealers have a no questions asked policy where if someone is denied for any reason, no other person can pick up the gun. While on the outside edge of probability, it's a scenario that could definitely play out this way. Dad goes on to say that he went to the dealer to pick it up for his son, and the dealer denied him as well, and he wanted to know what we were going to do to remedy the situation. I talked to the man a little more and listened to what he was saying, and it all of a sudden clicked that something really wasn't right. "Sir, how old is your son?" "He's 37. I took a few seconds to figure out what the heck to say or do because this is ridiculous. "Okay, then it sounds like he was denied the transfer by Nix, not the gun dealer specifically. We can do anything to override something like that. The problem is my boy had this ex-wife who was a real wuss." He went on for a long backstory. It turns out this man's 37-year-old boy caught a domestic violence conviction which disqualified him from owning a firearm ever, and rightfully so. Screw that whole dysfunctional situation. I can imagine how something like that could happen to someone so supported by his dad. Story 9. We get lots of people who use us for transfers. They buy online, and then the gun comes to us, and we handle the background check. One guy had done a transfer with us previously, and I got a bad feeling about him. Nothing concrete, he just bugged me. A few weeks later, he called again for another transfer. The gun was coming from Alaska, so I told him it was going to take a bit longer than usual, and I'd call him as soon as it arrived. The next day, he called wanting to know if I had a tracking number yet. I didn't. The Alaska FFL only did business by mail. How the heck a letter was supposed to get to Alaska overnight, I know not. Again, I told him to be patient. Fast forward a week, and he calls me 3 times. He lets slip that the dealer in Alaska won't talk to him, and he needs me to be the go-between. That's a red flag. Sellers normally communicate with buyers. He was acting really sketchy and impatient, so I had decided to deny the sale. So, I called the dealer, because this was getting sketchy. The dealer told me he canceled the sale. Interesting, never had that happen before. The dealer said, "And I'm quitting here. That guy is a serial manslayer in the making." He'd harassed the dealer several times a day, starting on the day he ordered the gun. The dealer said the guy knew the sale was canceled because he told him and refunded his money. That settled it for me. I wasn't interested in handling any transfers for him. When I finally blocked his phone number, 2 days after talking to the dealer, I had 35 missed calls from him. Story 10. Paperwork accuracy is a big issue. It has to be 100%. If your government-issued ID doesn't match the info you put on a form, and you don't have any of the allowed supporting information, then no gun sales to you. I had one guy come in only with the title to his car. No government-issued photo ID. He spouted some crap about sovereign citizens and all that. We took his info and blacklisted him on the computer. We didn't want to be associated with that type of folk. We would also ask what the intended use was for and lead them to a certain hunting season. An example would be, "Okay, why do you need a .22 rifle? Going to hunt some deer?" If they answered yes, no gun. The .22 rifle, while capable of killing a deer, is not allowed in our state's hunting regulations or any that I know of. Big red flag. We had a protocol that if we got strange customers, like folks asking for 1 bullet, seeming like they were just trying to get a gun, making threatening statements, etc., we would make them fill out their section of the 4473 form, photocopy their ID, and then deny the sale. This way we could involve law enforcement as needed. If we just told them no, you have nothing else than a crappy description and some security camera footage. The one that really sticks out is the guy who, in the course of small talk feeling out the customer, asked if he could walk out with the gun that day. We told him that if the paperwork was acceptable and the background check came back as a proceed, then he would be able to. He follows up with, "Good, now I can ice my jerk wife." We had him do the paperwork, copied his ID, and denied him right there. He was pissed, to say the least. He finally left. We called the cops, and they followed up with a wellness check. Turns out he was just a jerk. We still blacklisted him on the computer. Story 11. I worked in a gun store years ago, and one customer stands out to me even now, a trashy white crack strughead with tattoos all over who came in to buy a bulletproof vest and kept bragging about needing it for work because he was a cleaner. I never bothered to ask what exactly he was addicted to. I could just tell it was something. I told him that's super duper, but in New York we could only sell stab-proof vests to non-cops. He then tried to convince us that we should give it to him on credit, and he would pay us back when he finished his next job. It was almost surreal, having some idiot try to convince us that he was a professional hitman and that he needed a $120 vest on credit and could only pay us after his next job. I know this isn't about firearms, but it just stood out in my head so much I figured I should share the story with you guys. Ultimately, we wound up calling the cops on him, and he was escorted out after he threw a fit about our terrible customer service. Story 12. I did front-end code for a lot of small firearm companies that used NFD, N./gear fire websites to sell guns online. You wouldn't believe the amount of successful fraud there was in purchasing $10,000 scopes. However, the worst customer that one of them told me about was a man who had offed his girlfriend a few days after purchasing a gun. She gun shop owner unfortunately didn't see any red flags and lost her business over what happened. She was forced to close for investigation, but by the time the investigation was completed she had lost too much money and couldn't afford to keep paying the lease on her location. Basically, scopes are a very, very expensive firearm accessory that you are allowed to have shipped to your home. People would use a stolen credit card, then purchase an item and have it delivered to abandoned buildings and empty lots. I have no idea why the UPS drivers would leave the package there. The main issue is that a lot of firearm dealers were set up with drop shipping, so as soon as an order was created it went directly from the distributor to the customer without the dealer ever seeing the transaction unless they manually logged in and looked. Unfortunately, it was very risky to use drop shipping due to fraud. Thermal scopes can get expensive. Story 13. I worked at a large outdoor store in their firearms section. We had a customer come in and ask about a precision rifle chambered in .338 Lapua. Then, while handing him his background paperwork, he asked, "How far can this bullet hit a human-sized target?" He said he was buying it for big game hunting, which sounded a little sketchy, I know. I gave him an answer. "Oh, at least 1,000 yards, but I'll get a definite answer." I walked back in to find the manager, who was the only person who could deny a sale, explaining what happened. The manager had him fill out the paperwork and get his ID, and then denied the sale immediately after. And the kicker was that he used his Chinese passport with a student visa as his ID. Story 14. This is when I was pretty new and just a lowly counter person. This pumped-up dillhole comes in, glances in a case, and points out a Kimber. These are rather expensive pistols. This one was in the $2,500 range. He says he wants it. This is a straw purchase behavior, so I was on watch for strange behavior from him immediately. Upon pulling the gun from the case, I see the tag has been marked. We had a secret way of marking tags of guns. Someone has looked at if they demonstrate behavior that indicates they may send someone in for a straw purchase. I go back to grab the gun and tell my manager what's up. He starts to try to figure out why it's marked, seeing if we have any notes, while I go out to start paperwork. I give the guy the spiel. The paperwork needs to be filled out in an extremely precise manner, and he is rolling his eyes at me and making a show of ignoring me, telling me he has his own FFL and knows what he's doing. So, he fills out the paperwork, and I start looking it over. Mistakes everywhere. He put USA in the county field, didn't use caps in the state field, scribbled out mistakes without dating and initialing, and checked a box that doesn't need to be checked unless you're an alien. I made him fix all of those things, and he kept telling me I'm stupid and don't know what I'm talking about, and he did it perfectly, but begrudgingly fixed the errors. I would have shut him down for being a jerk, but I wanted to give my manager time to nail him for a straw purchase instead. Looking over his 4473 again, I notice his middle name is spelled Benjamin. I look at his ID, it shows Benjamin, so I ask him how to spell his middle name and he replies, "Can't you read, wuss?" I say that I can read so well, in fact, that I can see his name is spelled differently on his paperwork than on his driver's license. He says, "I don't know. I never use my middle name. Give me my ID. I'll fix it even though it doesn't matter." At this point, thankfully, my manager comes out. He's a big dude, probably 6'3" and 260 pounds or so. He starts asking the guy about the gun, trying to determine whether it's a straw purchase. The guy gets defensive, saying, "This dumb wuss has been trying to tell me she knows better than me since I got here, now you're interrogating me." He'd been taking his verbal abuse for the last half hour, and had had enough. So I flung back, this from a guy who can spell his own middle name. My manager gave me this wide-eyed dude, not helping, looked and tried to calm the customer down, but it was too late. The guy reached over the counter like he was going to grab me and said, "You dumb bish." He could immediately see that he went way too far from the look on the manager's face. He stopped, turned, and walked out. The manager followed him out the front door and stared him down until he drove out of the parking lot. Story 15. I was a former gun shop employee. An automatic ejection from the store is when the customer asks which kind of firearm is effective for harming or offing people. I've personally called the police on a few sketchy buyers. All came through with warrants or issues. My boss didn't take this kind of stuff lightly. We had short team meetings every week to ensure everyone understood what was going on. He was an excellent boss. Story 16. Our range rents out firearms for trap, skeet shooting. We had a lady come in asking strange questions like, "Does it hurt if someone gets shot with it?" And also acted weird when she answered a call and told the person that she was at a coffee shop. She left, and we called the cops to file a report of a suspicious person. Story 17. I worked in a gun store for about a year and a half. I had a couple of guys come in asking for cheap firearms. Okay, no big deal, people are on a budget. Been there, so they give me a price point of about $250. Again, no big deal. They want a handgun, not a revolver. I showed them a used High Point, Canic, couple of cars, and a Kel-Tec. They asked me to disassemble it to see the serial numbers. Kind of weird, but I figured they just wanted to make sure the guns matched up or something like that. Then I overheard them talking about blacking out the serial number. Ask them why they want to black them out, and if they know it's illegal, say that they wanted untraceable guns. Nope, I immediately told them to leave. In Illinois, you need a firearm ownership ID FOID card to buy weapons. We don't let anyone touch the weapons unless they have them. So, I got their name from that and told my boss. I believe he called the police, but I'm not sure. They could have just been some crazy big brothers coming for me types. Either way, they seemed pretty far off. I should mention the police did get involved. Never found out what happened though. I guess my boss looked at footage of the parking lot and gave the police the vehicle they were driving as well. Story 18. I work at a small shop on the Ohio River. When I say small, I mean it's the owner, his son, and me. That being said, we sell a lot of firearms because we have a decent selection and the absolute best prices available to any customer. With us being so small, we all see pretty much every gun sale. We will personally refuse to sell to anyone one of the three of us finds sketchy at all. If you smell of smoke or alcohol, no sale. If we know you from our small town somehow, and you've got a violent reputation, no sale. The most common red flag I see is children coming in with an older friend to buy the gun for them. If you look remotely close to being under 21 at all, we ask for your ID if you're with someone attempting to purchase a firearm. We see 17 and 18-year-old kids come in with friends who are in their early 20s that try to buy the gun for their younger friend. No sale that day, or any for either of them. I don't care if the 24-year-old comes back alone, no sale. If the younger friend turns 18, no sale. Sorry bud, but if we feel it's not worth the risk, no screaming or crying, or "but my daddy lets me" is going to change our minds. Story 19. The guy came in looking pretty ill. His face was bright red, and he was sweating profusely while struggling to breathe. One of my employees was convinced he might be having a heart attack, so he asked if he was okay. This guy went ballistic and cussed him out for bothering him. One of the many insane things he yelled was, "What? You got something against red people?" My employee backed off and let us know that he was unhinged. He walked over to the gun counter and asked to see a revolver. He immediately pointed it at my formerly concerned employee and said, "I wonder if this would be good enough to put a bullet through the head of that nosy son of a wuss." We had already been filled in by our plainclothes loss prevention guy who was now following him around after his outburst. When he made that threat, I didn't bother asking him to put the gun down. We have to assume the worst. So, I took it from him. I couldn't risk giving him any chance to load it in case he was concealing ammunition. You never know. He started screaming that he was going to get a gun and finish us all. Our loss prevention didn't take kindly to that and attempted to physically restrain him until the police could arrive. It took 4 of us to hold that big jerk down. Needless to say, he was arrested for terroristic threats and assault. Story 20. There are a bunch of subtle and not so subtle red flags I used to look out for. One big one was when a buyer was clearly being coached, either by someone next to them or even over the phone, about what to say or do during the purchase. That always raised alarms. Then there were cases where someone would lie about being a U.S. citizen, which happened often in border states. I also paid attention to how people presented themselves. For example, I wouldn't sell to someone decked out head to toe in one color with face tattoos. Basically someone who looked like they were repping a gang. While not illegal, it's enough to make you pause. Obvious ones included people who are intoxicated, acting strangely, or clearly angry or overly emotional. You also get people giving laughable reasons for wanting a gun, like trying to buy a 9mm handgun for hunting. If someone came off as blatantly immature or unsafe, that was an instant deal-breaker too. Selling firearms isn't just about paperwork. It's about judgment, and trust me, you learn to trust your gut real quick. Story 21. A guy showed up to pick up a gun without the proper proof of residency. I told him I couldn't release his gun even though he'd waited the proper 10-day waiting period because of this. He started threatening me because he was missing his daughter's birthday for this. Damn, parent of the year. Anyways, he started yelling and trying to grab both me and the firearm. The manager phoned the police. The man tried to come behind the counter and was shouting at the operator that he didn't consent to us calling the police because his voice was being illegally recorded. He cornered me behind the counter, at which point I drew my own gun, and he started screaming to the operator that I was in fact threatening him with a gun. I've never seen cop cars move so fast. They were on site in 90 seconds. Anyways, gun stores are a pretty tight community, so after the police escorted him off the property, I canceled the entire sale, and we sent the man's info to the local gun stores with a story of the incident. He showed up the next day to try to pick up the gun with the proper paperwork this time and got livid when we informed him we canceled the sale. We gently reminded him that the police said if they ever had to show up again, he was leaving in handcuffs, and he promptly left. 3 other gun stores called that day to tell us he attempted to buy a gun there that day and spent his time in the store talking badly about our store. Anyways, a couple of much less exciting times, I also denied sales. One kid showed up with a medical card. "Sorry, kid, bye." Another guy brought a piece of mail from the state as proof of residence. Turns out, this particular piece of mail was informing him of a warrant for his arrest as a result of his failure to appear in court. Yeah. How about you don't get a gun? Story 22. I'm a new FFL holder and have denied 3 purchases so far. One was an obvious straw purchase. The first guy asks a bunch of questions, finds what he wants, and then when it's time to fill out paperwork, the second guy walks up. No sale. They weren't too happy, but oh well. The second guy was just odd. I couldn't get a read on him. He asked about assault rifles, then sniper rifles, and then, when he didn't have the money for that, he inquired about a used shotgun I had. He asks me how deadly it was, and what it could be used for. I asked him a few questions to get a read on him and thought he was kind of sketchy, but he had a kid with him and seemed put together well enough. I politely told him that maybe he wasn't really in a position to buy yet, maybe he should do a bit of research and find what he was looking for before parting with any money. I told him that firearm ownership was a big responsibility, and if you don't really know what you're getting into or what you want, maybe you should hold off. Seemed nice enough about it once all was said and done. He came back to me at a gun show a couple of months later. I didn't remember him, but I found out later that my wife did. He filled out his 4437, and I got back a delayed response. I politely told him it was delayed, but we treat that as a denial, well within our rights to do that. I don't know if he went somewhere else, but we didn't sell to him. The third person was a young guy who wouldn't stop talking about how his boys were going to be so jellies when he pulled this out on the block. I got a bad feeling about him. Maybe it was his attitude. Maybe it was how he carried himself. He was by no means some fierce guy, but he really wanted to be. I don't want to give a gun to someone like that. Story 23. At the first gun shop I worked in, two guys came in. One dude was obviously foreign, and the other was local. The foreign guy wanted to buy a semi-auto was broad .-10, like an AK variant, and I said, sure, hand him the background form, and he passed it over to the other guy. I asked why he couldn't fill it out. He said, I'm not a US citizen. Nope, put the rifle in the back and said, I'm not doing it. They asked to speak to the owner because one of the guys is an upstanding local businessman, and that was his business partner. I said I wouldn't sell the rifle, and the other employees agreed with me. But the owner said, well, you could have. Nobody else would do the sale. The owner takes the rifle to his other store about 30 minutes away, and the local guy goes to pick it up there later. I quit about a week after that. For the record, I found out some time later the foreign guy became a US citizen, but he wasn't at the time. Also, both of the shops owned by that guy are closed down. Story 24. I work for an FFL. One thing that commonly gets misrepresented is how gun dealers will bend rules and want anyone and everyone to buy their guns and will do anything for a sale. This simply isn't true. If a dealer screws something up, they are not only risking their license and business but also actual jail time. I work in a shop, and if something fishy happens, we call the other shops and tell them to be on the lookout. This is after we try to get as much info about them as possible. We card everyone as they come in, check I.Ds when they want to look at guns, etc. If we get a weird feeling, we will sometimes just ask to see their ID again and make a photocopy right in front of them. Other shops call us sometimes to tip us off as well. We all have families and friends out there. We don't want anything to happen to them. I don't want a gun I sell to off an innocent person. No one does. I want the guns I sell to be used for fun, target shooting, school trap teams, collecting, and God forbid, self-defense. Thankfully, the vast majority of sales we deny are due to blatant straw sales or the person smelling of marijuana. Both are extremely common in my neck of the woods. Normally 5 or so a week of each instance. Sometimes we have to kick 10 people out a day for smelling like the backstage of a Snoop Dogg concert. Story 25. I worked for a small, family-owned gun store and range. Straw purchases were the main reason for us. One of the more obvious straw purchases was the wife or girlfriend coming in with their boyfriend/husband and having the guy sit there and tell her to tell us what they wanted. It would happen right in front of us. We would typically ask for his firearm card, Illinois, and they never had one. We would nope the heck out of that real quick. The margins on firearms aren't great. Glocks were usually about $50 to $70 tops, so it wasn't worth the sale to have the feds knocking on our door. My favorite was when they'd straight up tell us they were buying it for someone else. Even as gifts, you legally can't do that, and at least for us, we always had the policy of, if we know we can't. We always offered them the option of a gift certificate for the purchase price and then ran it like that. Local gun stores would also email the driver's license and gun card of suspected straw purchasers. Otherwise, unless the person was acting really strange or there was a problem with the 4473 questions, we rarely needed to deny a sale. Lots of people got the boot from the range though. If only we made everyone shoot before we sold them a gun. Story 26. I was living in Alaska for a year and picked up a part-time job in the winter as a gun counter clerk at a national sporting goods chain. One slow evening, a kid comes in, by kid, I'm talking college-aged, and starts staring into the pistol case. I asked him if he wanted to see one, and that I'd need his ID to verify his age, etc. All's going well. It's obvious he's new to guns. I asked him what his intended purpose and use was, in order to find what might suit his needs. He says he wants a cowboy-style gun, and all he wants to do is to go shooting to let off steam, and that his mom teases him for always being on the computer and growing up to be a scaredy cat. The more I talked to him, the more I realized he was just a closet weeaboo otaku. My brother's a full-on weeaboo, so I told the kid about how they had a big group of friends who met once a year during AX, or Comic-Con SD. The kid was straight up starry-eyed and told me he wished he knew people like that if he had friends like that, he wouldn't have bipolar issues. In the end, I told the kid not to buy a gun, save up his money, and get the hell out of Alaska. I swear I've not had a happier customer. The dude didn't even buy anything. I know his mom isn't necessarily a bad person, but he tried to purchase a gun to be more manly after too much crap from his family. There are obvious societal problems with the ideal man and manly activities, and I must address this. I really felt for him too, because my own dad was like that to my brother. One time my brother asked if he could use my backpack for school because my pops was chastising him for using his Idolmaster messenger bag to carry his books in. My dad was giving him crap, calling it a purse and whatnot. I told him to tell my dad to screw himself, but still gave him my backpack anyway. I no longer live at home, but my little brother still does. My brother absolutely hates my dad even though they're very similar. Story 27. I don't work in a gun shop, but I'm an avid collector and conduct private sales every so often. In my state, there are a couple of modest rules that have to be followed. You can't knowingly transfer to a prohibited person, you can't transfer across state lines, you can't transfer to a minor unless they're a family member, and that kind of thing. Due to my state's proximity to Illinois and Chicago and the relative ease of obtaining a carry license, the carry license has become kind of a stand-in for background checks that private sellers can't do. I ask for a driver's license to show residency and a carry permit to show this person would pass a 4473 background check if I ran one, and then I have them fill out a bill of sale basically saying, I promise I'm not a prohibited person. Any legit gun enthusiast can breeze through those requirements. People who get annoyed about them set off red flags for me. This one dude super sketched me out, and I took some screen grabs of the conversation. Basically, he was from out of state, and tried to cajole me into selling him an AK pattern rifle. After double and triple checking the relevant laws, I told him I wasn't comfortable with a private sale, but I'd be more than happy to go to a dealer and pay the transfer fee. It's legal to transfer to an out-of-state buyer if you do it through a dealer. We met at a gun store, and it took 10 minutes to do it. He wasn't happy with that. He sent this random gun collection picture claiming to already own several machine guns they weren't, so obviously he can't be a prohibited person. Then he tried the whatever I'll just buy from someone else move, probably hoping I'd be in a hurry to sell. Never be in a hurry to sell. I bid him on his way. I maintain a no-sketch policy for sales. There's always another buyer out there who won't give you crap about basic ass covering. A week later, the rifle was sold to a completely normal dude with a valid permit who lived in the next county over. I think the guy was just an idiot, not a criminal straw buyer or an aspiring mass shooter. But when someone argues with you about the law and tries to pressure you into a sale, that's a red flag. Story 28. When I used to sell firearms, there were definitely some recurring red flags that popped up. One of the biggest was people trying to buy multiple firearms, usually rows, without much explanation, and when you'd press them, it would come out that they were just planning to flip them at gun shows for a big profit. Back during the Obama years, folks would buy a $500 to $700 AR and resell it for $1,200 or more pretty easily. Another common one is people walking in saying, I want a 9mm, with zero clue what brand or price range they were looking for. It always felt sketchy when someone clearly had no idea what they wanted but just needed a gun. You also get people trying to buy for someone else and claiming it's a gift, which obviously raises concerns about straw purchases. And of course there's the occasional customer who straight up lies on their info. Over time, you learn how to read people the way cops say they get a gut feeling. Some questions you ask just to watch how they react. It's definitely a weird mix of sales and psychology. Story 29. My favorite was Dean. I work in WA state. We could still sell long guns to residents of a few other states, including AK. This guy comes in, strikes up a conversation with our weird, smelly counter guy, fondly referred to as Dougie Fresh Breath. our resident cowboy action weirdo. They bond over extremely exaggerated or outright bogus tales of times I bested a grizzly bear, and Dougie Fresh Breath starts paperwork. I was the manager and already keeping an eye on the sale because the customer basically asked, "What is a good gun for hunting?" without offering any specifics like what or where he is hunting. Dougie handed him a rifle. The guy basically looked it up and down and said he'd take it, didn't ask any questions, shoulder it, or work the bolt at all. Classic straw purchase behavior. The guy fills out his paperwork, and at this point, I'm already sure I'm gonna shut the sale down, but I proceed with the paperwork and check, so we have him on file. Dougie calls me over, after 4473 is complete, and goes, "A banger? How do I call this in?" When I ask what he means, he points out that the guy only has one name, Dean. I look at his ID and sure enough, it only has the one name on it. I ask if it's his first name or last name. He says yes. I ask if his name is Dean, and he says no, only one Dean. I explain that legally, every person in the US has both a first and last name, and he said not an AK. After trying to explain futilely that AK is actually part of the US, I gave in and told Dougie to call it in. He went back to make the call, then called me back because it didn't work. I took over, and hilarity ensued. Anyone who has ever called next can tell you that they aren't allowed to break their script, and you can predict what words come out of their mouth in what order for the entirety of the call. So, when you violate the sacred rhythm of the call, things get uncomfortable. Next operator asked, "Last name?" "Dean, Dean, I replied. "First name?" she prompted. "No first name," I said. There was a pause before she said uncertainly, First name?" "He doesn't have a first name," I repeated. "What? That isn't a thing," she said, clearly confused. "He needs a first name." I told him that, I said with a sigh. But he insisted that was his full legal name. No, it isn't," she said firmly. "He needs a first name." "Yeah, I thought so," I said. "Already reaching for the next step? Please cancel the check." I said I'm going to shut this down. I went back out front, and Dean was gone. He just left. I was livid at Dougie. Our policy was to take the customer's ID to the back when we called in, and he hadn't, so I wasn't able to give it to the cops when he left. Story 30. I run my own small shop, and am thankful to be able to screen my own customers effectively. However, sometimes, my license info gets entered automatically into large retailer databases that don't vet their customers and blindly drop ship me guns with no notice, dumping the responsibility on me. In one case about a year ago, a major retailer I won't name did exactly this and also left out the packing slip by mistake, so I had no idea who the gun was for. I received the box during a particularly busy Friday late in the afternoon, and only had time to log the pertinent information while I sorted out my existing appointments. I jotted down a note to call the retailer Monday morning since I was leaving first thing at 6 a.m. on Saturday for a weekend trip. Monday morning, I come home to half a dozen messages on my answering machine, all from a very irate individual yelling incoherently into the phone from a millimeter away, demanding I give them their gun. After an hour of analyzing the contents of these voicemails, I pieced together that they had purchased this extremely high-quality high-point carbine and expected it to be delivered directly to their door, no questions asked, and involving no ID or background checks. I called the retailer, relayed the contents of the voicemails, got an apology, and promptly returned the gun to them on their dime. Then I called and attempted to speak to the would-be buyer, who was impossible to communicate with, and belligerent beyond comprehension. I clearly informed them as politely as I could that I declined their business, returned the gun to the retailer, and didn't want any future business from them. They uttered some choice words and hung up. The next morning, an hour before opening time, this person shows up banging on the door, demanding that I give them their gun. Without getting into too much detail, they were asked to leave and only finally hightailed it when the threat of police involvement was raised. Every single thing about this was sketchy as heck, and I'm glad it's the only bad apple I've had in going on 10 years in the biz. Story 31. I would help out on the weekends, doing gun shows or working the store. Two things I remember that made me go, nope. Two Hispanic guys come into the store and start browsing. Let them look around a bit, then ask if they need any help. So one starts talking in Spanish to his buddy who is translating. This goes on a minute before I ask who the gun is for. The guy translating says it for him, but my suspicions are pretty high at this point, and he starts asking some more questions. He asks something about whether you can get high-cap mags for one of them, so I said, I don't know, let me ask the owner. I go in the back and tell the owner what I think is going on, and he comes out, starts talking to them, and asks who the gun is for. The guy translating it says it's for his buddy, but he's buying it. Well, obviously that's a no-no, and the owner pointed that out, and the fact that he'd already told me it was for him. They were told to leave. I was working a gun show, and you have to keep one ear on the person you're dealing with, and the other on surrounding conversations, as well as make sure no one tries a snatch and grab. It's stressful at times, to say the least. We mostly deal in new guns and do custom work on them as well, but occasionally we take guns in on consignment. At this particular show we only had one used gun, and it was a pristine King Cobra, but it had no box, and the guy wanted $1,600 for it, which was obviously not happening. So we're getting a lot of interest in the Cobra until we tell them it's a consignment and the seller didn't have the box and docs. They'll look at it and say they give X amount of money, and we'd have to say the seller is firm, and that was it. But along came this one guy, and as bad as it sounds, how you dress and present yourself says a lot. The guy was a younger black guy, probably in his 20s, which isn't anything to draw flags until you take in the sagging pants, multiple red bandanas, tats, and excessively baggy clothing. Not saying he was a gangster, but being in Atlanta I won't say he wasn't either, but he starts asking about the Cobra because he heard me telling the previous guy it was used. He wanted to know if we had more used guns and if they required background checks. For starters, I have nothing against wanting a used gun, they're cheaper, and a lot of the time you can find guns of better quality than what you can buy new in a similar price range. But if you start asking if it requires a background check, nah, keep walking. Anything that goes through a dealer will require a background check. It isn't worth risking your business over not doing it. Of course, you always have to keep an eye out for people who smell of alcohol, etc., as they are excessively impatient or move a ton. You pick up a lot of cues from behavior alone most of the time, and to prevent people from taking it the wrong way, I have nothing against grass. In fact, I'd love for it to be legalized and regulated like alcohol and tobacco just to remove the stigma from it. What I have issues with is that guns and any kind of drug do not mix. If you're going out to buddy's property to shoot shots, get a good drink and ink, maybe pass a joint around and do so after you shoot said guns, and they are safely put up. Too many accidents happen because of poor impaired decision-making abilities. Story 32. This was during straw purchases, which is when the purchaser of the firearm is not the actual person for whom the firearm is intended. I've had people, mostly female significant others, come in with a person who is doing all the inquiries about the firearm, pointing out the firearm that they want, and so forth. Then, when it comes time to start paperwork, the person who showed no interest in any firearm is the one who tries to do the paperwork. I clarify that the person for whom the firearm is intended has to be the one who submits the paperwork and has a background check. Otherwise, it's a straw purchase. They then inevitably say that they are the intended end user of the firearm. I deny them and call around to the other shops in my area and let them know about the denied attempted straw purchase, because I've had several of the denied attempted purchasers say, I'm just going to go purchase the gun from somewhere else before, but also because I don't want people that aren't supposed to have guns getting their hands on them. If you're a felon or not legally in this country, you do not have my Second Amendment rights. Story 33. I worked selling guns for over a year, and it was pretty easy to see who would get denied. Straw purchases were always the biggest problem, though. There are a lot of gray areas when it comes to gifting guns, and it is completely up to the person behind the counter to interpret the intention of the sale. I had many people say they were giving the gun to a significant other, and if I believed that this was the true intent, and I believed that person was legally able to have a firearm, I was okay with proceeding with the transaction. A few times, though, I had someone do a background check and get delayed, and then try to have their significant other attempt to purchase the same type of firearm or similar. I would straight out deny that purchase. My favorites were the couples that would look around and hold guns, and when it came time to purchase said gun, one of them would walk off during the background check and disappear. That was a big red flag, and we would outright deny that sale. Some people would argue, but ultimately if I don't feel that the transaction is 100% legitimate, that gun was not getting sold. It is definitely not hard to get a feel for people's intentions when it comes to buying guns. As with anything else, it is largely up to their actions. If they are alone and glued to their phone or asking someone questions that would be considered pretty common knowledge, those are pretty big red flags as well. Now, if little Lisa, who weighs 100 pounds, soaking wet, came in asking questions and attempting to buy, say, a specific .357, and obviously is talking with someone, that's a big nope. But if she comes in and is seriously interested in learning about or looking for something for self-protection and is looking for something smaller for carrying, that does not seem to be a straw purchase. It is hard to tell sometimes, but with anything in life you start to get a feel for your customers and their true intentions. It is really 100% body language to me. Communication is also key. Make sure all your sales staff and employees know if a specific person is attempting to purchase a gun, so they can come back another day and attempt to talk to someone else. Story 34. Okay, from when I was in late high school through my college years, I worked at the Kmart we had here. Things were bad, and it was routine that I would be responsible for my entire side of the store. Beyond filling out the paperwork and putting the call into the state police for the background check, I was not given any other instructions or guidelines in regard to firearm sales. A man came in to buy some sort of long gun. He was on one of the store's electric scooters. Watching him handle the gun in the state he was in, it just didn't seem appropriate or responsible to sell him a firearm. It seemed like a recipe for disaster. I called my manager, but he didn't find fault with the situation. I believe that guy got his gun. He wasn't potentially malevolent, but he seemed like a danger to himself and probably others. I don't think that it was responsible, but my manager made the call. Story 35. My father is totally besties with an old neighbor of ours who was in the Secret Service during the Reagan and Bush senior administrations. He and my pops are avid collectors and have concealed carry licenses, even though my state is incredibly strict on any type of open or concealed carry. Went to a gun shop with him and his best friend once. For background, I'm a med student and hope to do psychiatry. We had a patient come into our office because he was hospitalized 20 or 30 years ago and wanted to buy a gun now in the present day. Obviously, one time, he was hospitalized when he was 17 because his mom was painfully strict and had him committed. He did tactical target shooting as a hobby. My day was incredibly slow, so I spent a long time with this man. He was super knowledgeable, and I learned a lot from him. So, I thought I was prepared to go into this gun store. I was not. Pops and his bestie walk away to look at something else, and I get approached by an employee and I immediately start getting nervous, sweating heavily. I thought 7 years in training for psychiatry. I have about 3-4 more years to go that I was going to be prepared. But this man grilled me harder than I have ever been grilled, or taught to question and assess others. I got the sweats and everything totally froze. I didn't even buy anything. It was just that intimidating. They do not screw around. Gun shows, however, are a totally different story. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.